Hello, everybody. I'm Rob Wallace here in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm an evolutionary epidemiologist with the People's CDC, here with an update on the COVID-19 pandemic. This week, we'll cover the state of global COVID and the state of U.S. COVID, and provide an update on the likely winter surge in COVID-19 at a time when governments worldwide have rolled back almost the entirety of their pandemic control campaigns. We begin with global COVID. In the graph in red, the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Center reports a slight increase to 3.2 million new confirmed COVID cases worldwide for the week ending October 9th. The number of global weekly deaths there in white declined to 9,600 confirmed deaths this past week. In green, we see, even with the introduction of the new bivalent booster, a precipitous bottoming out in vaccinations this month continues down to less than 10 million new shots administered this week worldwide. This New York Times map shows hotspots over the past week in Europe and Asia. There in purple, the surge in European countries continues, centered in France, Germany, Austria, Slovenia, and Greece. Taiwan also remains an epicenter in average daily new cases per 100,000 population. As we can see from these percent changes in caseloads the past couple weeks, rebounds there in warm colors are spreading across the globe, including a sharper increase in Paraguay and a new increase in Canada, all of Europe except Portugal, Ukraine, parts of the Middle East, suddenly China and Thailand along Myanmar, and a wider swath of Africa. At a time when most countries other than China have rolled back non-pharmaceutical interventions like mask mandates, clocking in at no more than 60% on the Containment and Health Index measuring such interventions. At a time when the vaccine strategy many governments say they're pursuing instead is failing. Much of the world is at best vaccinated for variants no longer circulating. We see uneven campaigns in booster vaccination across the world. On the one hand, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Finland, Germany, Italy, and Japan show top-tier booster campaigns. In contrast, we see near nothing in Russia, India, Pakistan, and Indonesia, and a mediocre campaign in the US. Even as vaccination is demonstrably working, at least as measured by deaths and hospitalization. By these Canadian data, we see the more doses people across age groups take, keeping their immune systems informed, the lower the death rate on the left and the lower the hospitalization on the right, with fully vaccinated people 9 times less likely to die. The collapse in vaccination, hand in hand with the rollback in the non-pharmaceutical campaigns that vaccination campaigns depend on, is occurring exactly when multiple Omicron subvariants are circulating across large expanses of the world. As of October 10th, we see in those countries subtyping their COVID samples, BA5 in pink dominates, but BA2 in orange and BA4 in red remain in respectable circulation, with BA2.75 in purple increasing in proportion, with the weird continuation of Delta in Germany and BA2.12.1 in Hong Kong and Costa Rica in hot pink, and with heavy proportions of other subvariants there in gray across all the countries. Data visualization specialist Mike Honey shows that the other subvariants here are taking off. In this case, XBB and XBB.1 in Bangladesh in the yellow, Singapore in pink, and starting off in Australia in blue, with as high as 50% in samples showing the characteristic XBB amino acid replacements. And there may be more to come. Those other subvariants may represent the starburst of Omicron evolution that has been recently documented in what may be considered a golden age in SARS-2 evolution. There's the XBB we were talking about, but also BQ1.1, BM.1.1.1, CB.1, BA.2.75.2, CA.1, BR.2, BE.4.1.1, and on. Not only do we see the veritable zoo of new subvariants now circulating here, but that many in the colored circles are converging on the same molecular adaptations or combinations of new amino acid replacements that allow the different subvariants to be resistant to monoclonal antibody treatments for COVID. That is, Omicron is evolving out from underneath many of our biomedical interventions, as well as our natural antibody responses. Here, computational biologist Raj Narayanan shows the recently evolved XBB and BQ1.1 subvariants at the top show unprecedented antibody escape on the y-axis, while maintaining similar or even better binding with our ACE2 receptor along the x-axis there. There is no trade-off that COVID minimizers repeatedly allude to as some sort of essentialist feature of viral evolution. These subvariants are escaping antibodies and still binding to our receptors. Indeed, there appears all sorts of room for SARS-2 to evolve, even at this pre-surge nadir of 3 million new cases a week. This network is called an interactome, a play on genome and proteome, but for all the interactions that occur in a SARS-2 infection. A team largely out of Cornell University shows here the multi-level interactions between SARS-2 proteins and the black diamonds, and between the viral proteins and our proteins aligned around the orange circles denoting major parts of our cellular metabolism, including protein translation, mRNA splicing, glucose metabolism, and so on. So SARS-2 has a lot to play with here to get out from underneath our medical innovations, out from underneath our natural immunity and the natural variation the whole of humanity represents. A few mutations here and there, and the virus can radically alter its pathogenesis and stereochemical strategy across multiple host targets. If you remember from a couple episodes ago, we described how the receptor binding domain that helps SARS-2 key into our cells completely changed the way it tackled docking with a human ACE2 receptor. That's the lock that the viral key opens. Evolutionary biochemist Tyler Starr's group showed the receptor binding domain went from a stable three-way polar interaction in the original Wuhan strain to dynamic salt bridging in Omicron. You don't need to know all the details here. The point here is you do have to know who you're fucking with. Now, it's debatable whether a virus is alive by any biological definition. Certainly, it is not conscious, but that doesn't mean its evolutionary process across millions of infections a week that we've allowed it for 3 years running isn't capable of a kind of mass cognition capable of big picture strategy. And in the face of a willfully defeated opposition that rolls back public health protection to keep global capitalism running. The molecular changes scientists have been documenting here translate into advantages out in the epidemiological field. Evolutionary biologist Tom Wentzeliers plotted out the differences in population growth rate in comparison to BA 5.2 for some of the key new subvariants and found distinct differences with the BQ1 here, BA 2.3.2, and XBB all excelling, and in all likely by way of different stereochemical strategies, and probably also depending on the population background immunity. So however microscopic, who we are fucking with here is a flexible and adaptable opposition. So the difficult moment here stateside is that against President Biden's declaration a couple weeks ago, the pandemic is clearly not over. Indeed, as the European incidences and hospitalizations indicate, the winter surge is already underway. But the pandemic continues in its apparent US retraction. This New York Times map shows almost the whole of the country is presently characterized by a relative decline in COVID cases per 100,000 population, although Kentucky and other counties in Appalachia continue on as a stronghold. We are forced to take these metrics at face value, but it doesn't help that hospitals and health departments are following the CDC and NIH's lead and adhering to looser reporting standards. And it doesn't help that the now popular home tests aren't reportable. Even the country's lone extreme epicenter uses the community map CDC devised to soft pedal US COVID to pretend away its obvious outbreak. Kentucky's leading paper cited the lagging community levels map the CDC switched to, based largely in hospital capacity, there on the bottom left, to say, quote, according to the latest available CDC data, there are only a handful of Kentucky counties, 8, that are currently experiencing high COVID-19 community levels. On the other hand, 74 Kentucky counties that span the state have low community levels, while the remaining 38 have moderate levels, end quote. The caseload map in the previous slide and the CDC's community transmission map here on the lower right show otherwise. So Kentucky speaks to CDC strategy or an utter lack of one. The CDC chose not to dispatch a team down to Lexington to help squash the outbreak there to keep it from serving as a source for a rebound for the rest of the country. As the Kentucky Department of Health website indicates, citing the switch to the community level map, the CDC instead supplied local authorities in Kentucky the quantitative rationale to do nothing, letting SARS-2 percolate in Appalachia for months. The damage is compounded by the administration's announcement this week that it would be ending daily reports of COVID data and only reporting on a weekly basis now. As CBS News reports, quote, health officials have long acknowledged that new COVID-19 cases are now being largely undercounted, given the widespread use of unreported at-home tests for the virus. The agency also moved over the summer to shift from daily to weekly reporting of vaccinations, which are now published only on Thursdays. Other parts of the CDC's online COVID-19 tools are also being wound down this month. A self-checker chat box to help people figure out when to seek testing and medical care is due to be scrapped on Friday. The CDC's country-by-country travel notices for the virus were erased earlier this week. For now, the CDC is still publishing data on COVID-19 hospitalizations that are collected daily through a separate agency, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It is unclear if daily reporting on these figures will continue after COVID-19 hospitalization data is handed over to the CDC's control in December. End quote. The CDC, where COVID data goes to die. We do see the levels of SARS-2 virus detected in the wastewater that comes through our sewage plants, a leading indicator of the pandemic, indicating much of the country is in cooled off blues. We do see, however, sewage plants in orange and red representing SARS-2 loads of 60 to 100% more than their previously recorded levels to be found in western Washington state and Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and across the Northeast. The more acute measure of changes in sewage loads over the past 15 days show red flare-ups of 1,000% or more of SARS-2 detected in states of the Rockies. We have Nebraska, Illinois, Wisconsin, New York State, including down into New York City, and the coastal Southeast. To sum up, here's the People's CDC version of our present community transmission by county, mapped by our own Les Schaffer. It's the combo of caseloads and test positivity that the CDC plots, but unlike the CDC, the People's CDC differentiates the high level of danger counties are subjected to beyond 10% COVID positivity into high, very high, and extremely high exposure. Down at the bottom, we see that the People's CDC also now differentiates exposure by both the percent of counties and by the percent population. We see here that by population, we're down to 45.5% of the American people are in communities subjected to high to extremely high COVID exposure. That's welcome news, although that's still half the country. As in the Times map, the COVID outbreak continues its retreat, even with hotspots in Western Oregon, along the northern border, parts of the Northeast, and Kentucky. And we should keep in mind with another 40% of the American people subjected to substantial exposure. And yet, short-sightedness appears more a feature of American public health than a bug. For certainly such as one as Anthony Fauci, getting a booster shot with Stephen Colbert without a mask on, knows all that literature on the surge in Omicron evolution, as well as the spike in cases in Europe. But here's how CBS News shared Fauci's take in the context of its report on why CDC was rolling back its public COVID reports. The report quotes Fauci directly, speaking at a University of Southern California event. I was on the phone with colleagues in the health departments throughout the country just 2 nights ago, and everyone is having the same experience. The report continues. Fauci cited a considerable diminution around the country in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths reported from COVID-19. But he warned that an array of new variants now growing across the country, plus the risk respiratory diseases pose every winter, suggested, quote, it would be a bit cavalier to all of a sudden say we're completely through with it, end quote. To the lengths to which epidemiologists should avoid predictions about exactly what will happen, as Fauci does here, at what point do we abandon our responsibility for alerting our constituencies about all the evidence that indicates we are likely in serious trouble this winter? Was it merely cavalier when Biden declared the pandemic over? Was that what that was about? Or, as reports from earlier this year suggest, a concerted effort by the administration to pretend COVID over to help Democrats win the midterm elections later in the year? For even as the US is in a welcome downturn in COVID, we see SARS-2 evolution continuing, with the B5 variant being replaced by BA4.6, BF7, BA2.75, and now the hyperinfectious BQ1 in Kelly green and BQ1.1 in the dark green, with all those other supercharged subvariants we talked about only starting up. And in a kind of retcon or retroactive continuity, where the meaning of a previous event changes with something we learn later, we are now confirming what we largely knew, that against the CDC's assurances back last December, people are infectious long beyond the 5 days after which the health agency recommended people return to work. Epidemiologist Karina Marquez's team showed that of the more than 900 participants that were tested by rapid antigen tests 5 days after symptoms or their first positive test, 80% still tested positive for SARS-2. Indeed, as many as 20% continued to test positive at 14 days. The relationship held for the symptomatic and the asymptomatic, and across vaccination status, the not vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and fully vaccinated. And we're also confirming that reinfection isn't just another round of COVID. In a new preprint, a Washington University team showed that for all the long COVID or system-level damage listed down the left, all categories across vaccine status, none, partial, or fully vaccinated, had demonstrable increases in their hazard ratios with each new infection. That is, the more infections you get, the more likely you will suffer serious long-term illness. This is the mass disability event the Biden administration is skipping us all into, yucking it up with Stephen Colbert along the way. Unless we fight back against the Washington consensus, Democrat and Republican, that places employer objectives first. Really, it's the health and well-being of the American people that matter first and foremost. And that's COVID This Week from the People CDC. You can learn more about the People CDC and read this week's COVID weather report at our revamped website, peoplecdc.org.